I never thought rehab could be scarier than my drug binges, but that was before I checked into this dump. They stuck me in room 13, which I should have known was a bad omen. I was detoxing from oxy and heroin, which already made everything feel like a fever dream. The sweats, the shaking, the hallucinations, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. But it wasn't just the withdrawal. There was a man. He stood at the corner of my room, his face gaunt, eyes sunken into his skull like he hadn't slept in years. I thought it was just another hallucination, but he didn't disappear when I blinked. Every night he'd be there, not moving, just watching. One night I woke up to find him sitting on my chest, his bony fingers wrapped around my throat, cold and wet like they'd just come out of the ground. I couldn't breathe. I tried to scream, but it was like the air had been sucked out of the room. When I clawed at his hands, they crumbled like old bones in my grasp, leaving my hands coated in dust. The nurses found me the next morning passed out on the floor. They said I'd had a seizure, part of the detox. But every night after that, I woke up with handprints around my neck, bruised and raw. I stopped sleeping altogether. The man in room 13 never left, and he wasn't just a hallucination. Eventually, I found out about the last guy who stayed there, a junkie like me. He'd OD'd in the room. They didn't find him for 3 days, his body bloated and rotting in the summer heat. The staff never talked about it, but the other patients knew. He still lingered in the room, angry and jealous, feeding off our pain. I checked out early, signed myself out AMA. I'd rather take my chances on the streets with a needle in my arm than ever face him again. The counselor. They said Dr. Jenkins was the best. She'll help you work through your trauma, they promised. The truth is, I don't even know how much of what happened was real, but I know I'm not the only one who's seen her. When I first met her, she was all smiles. Too friendly, really. Rehab was supposed to be hell, right? Detoxing from alcohol and Xanax was hard, my skin itching for the burn of whiskey, my throat dry as a desert, my brain begging for a bar. But every session with her made things worse. She had this way of talking to you, getting inside your head. It started with simple questions about my family, my childhood. I told her things I hadn't told anyone before, about how my dad used to beat me, how my mom abandoned us. Jenkins didn't judge. She'd nod, scribble on her notepad, and tell me I was making progress. Then the dreams started. Every night I was back in her office, but the setting was all wrong. There were candles everywhere, casting strange shadows on the walls. I was tied to the chair, and Dr. Jenkins was looming over me, her eyes black as night, her smile stretching too wide across her face. Her hands would stroke my face, whispering things like, "You'll never leave." I'd wake up sweating, but the bruises on my wrists were real. In one session, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted her, told her about the dreams, the bruises. She just smiled, leaned in close, and whispered, "You're exactly where you belong." Her breath smelled of decay like a corpse left in the sun. When I blinked, she was gone, replaced by another counselor. "Dr. Jenkins left last year," he said, like I was crazy for asking about her. The other patients had stories too, late-night whispers about the counselor who messed with your mind, fed off your pain, and made you do things you didn't want to. I wasn't the first to see her, and I won't be the last. The visitors. Rehab was supposed to help me kick the meth and coke. It wasn't even my choice to be here. My family dragged me in after I OD'd at some club downtown. Fine. Whatever. At first it was the usual. Group therapy, lots of preaching, shitty food, and plenty of pills to take the edge off. But then the visitors started coming. It began innocently enough. A guy I'd never met before sat next to me during lunch. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils blown wide, and he reeked of something sour. "How are you holding up?" he asked, shoveling mashed potatoes into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in days. "I'm good," I lied, jonesing for a bump. "They're always watching," he muttered before walking away. I didn't think much of it until I saw him again that night, outside my window, standing in the rain. Except the window was 3 stories up. The next morning I asked the staff about him. They looked at me like I was crazy. There was no new guy. I chalked it up to detox hallucinations. Coke withdrawal is a beast, after all. But it didn't stop there. I'd see people sitting in the common areas, faces I didn't recognize, people who didn't belong. They'd watch me, whispering to each other, and when I'd try to talk to them, they'd vanish like smoke. One night, I couldn't sleep. The cravings were unbearable, and I was pacing the halls, desperate for anything to take the edge off. That's when I saw her, a woman standing at the end of the hallway, completely naked, her eyes wide and vacant. Blood dripped down her thighs, staining the white linoleum. I froze, watching as she beckoned me closer. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper. "Come with me," she said. "I have what you need." It was like my body moved on its own. I followed her into one of the empty rooms, and that's when I saw them. All the people I'd been seeing sitting in a circle around a mound of dirty needles, bags of white powder, and bottles of booze. It was a party from hell, the air thick with rot. They smiled at me, their teeth too sharp, too white. "Join us," they whispered over and over like a chant. My heart pounded, and I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I could smell the drugs, the sweet, tempting scent of cocaine calling my name. I passed out cold. When I woke up, I was back in my room. No one believed me, of course, but I knew. They weren't patients. They were ghosts, spirits of addicts who had died in this place. And they wanted me to join them, forever trapped in their never-ending high. The shadow and detox. By the third day of detox, I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The coke and perks had been out of my system for 72 hours, but I still felt like I was floating. They had me on benzos to keep me from freaking out, but that just made the hallucinations worse. Or maybe they weren't hallucinations. The first time I saw the shadow, I was curled up in my bed, sweating through my sheets. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Some darkness pooling in the corner of my room, but then it moved. It didn't have a shape, not really. It was just black, a writhing mass of darkness, growing bigger, sucking the air out of the room. I hit the call button for the nurse, but no one came. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I was paralyzed, frozen in my bed, forced to watch as the shadow crept closer. It was cold, so cold that my breath came out in puffs, like it was the dead of winter. When the shadow finally reached my bed, I could feel it wrapping around me, tightening, squeezing. My chest felt like it was going to cave in. I don't know how long it lasted, but when I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, gasping for air. The nurse said I'd had a panic attack, that it was the detox playing tricks on me, but I knew it wasn't just in my head. The next night, I heard it before I saw it, a scraping sound, like nails on a chalkboard. My heart started racing. I didn't even bother calling the nurse this time. I knew no one would come. The shadow was back, creeping out from the walls. It moved faster this time, as if it had grown stronger. It was more defined, too. Tall, vaguely human, with arms that seemed too long, ending in claws. I wanted to run, but I was trapped in my bed again, like I was glued to the mattress. It crawled onto the bed, its cold breath washing over me as it leaned in close. I could feel it now, whispering in my ear, its voice like nails being dragged across glass. "You'll never get out. You'll always need it." And I believed it. Every part of me ached for coke, for that rush. The shadow was right. There was no point fighting it. On the fifth night, the girl in the room next to me was found dead. She'd hanged herself with a bedsheet. The staff said it was depression, part of the detox, but I knew better. I'd heard her scream the night before. The shadow had gotten to her. Now, I can feel it getting closer every night. It's only a matter of time before it takes me, too. The visitors on the ward. I'd been sober for 2 weeks and I thought I was doing okay. My body was starting to feel normal again, but my mind, that was a different story. I had been a mess before I checked in here, doing whatever I could get my hands on. Coke, meth, booze, weed, shrooms, even pills when I was desperate enough. The withdrawals were hell, but at least the chaos had stopped, or so I thought. They started visiting me after lights out. It was usually around 2 a.m. when the halls were silent, and all I could hear was the ticking of the wall clock. I'd wake up to the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing just outside my door. The first few nights I convinced myself it was one of the staff doing rounds, but then The footsteps stopped right outside my room. I'd stare at the door, waiting for the handle to turn. It never did. Instead, I'd see a shadow pass by the gap under the door, like someone was standing just on the other side watching me. I thought maybe it was my mind playing tricks, detox screwing with my head, but it wasn't just me. The other patients started talking about them in hushed whispers. The visitors, people who came at night, standing by your bed watching you sleep. They didn't talk, didn't move, just stood there, waiting. Some patients swore they'd felt hands on their skin, cold and dry, like the dead. One night I woke up to find my roommate, Aaron, sitting on his bed, his face pale as death. "Do you see them?" he whispered. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the grogginess, and then I saw them. 3 figures standing at the foot of his bed, dressed in old, tattered clothes. They looked like they belonged in a different time, their skin thin and gray, eyes hollow pits. They were watching him. I wanted to scream, to do something, but my body wouldn't move. One of the figures slowly turned to look at me, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. The next morning, Aaron was gone too. No one knew where he went. The nurses said he must have left in the middle of the night, but I knew the truth. The visitors had taken him. I told the staff what I'd seen, but they said it was all in my head, part of the withdrawal. I stopped sleeping after that, too afraid of waking up to find those hollow-eyed figures standing over me, waiting for their turn to take me away. They're still out there. I hear the footsteps every night, and I don't know how long I have left before the visitors come for me.